In this webinar, The Power of Storytelling in Civics Education, you're going to hear about how and why stories can be a powerful tool in the classroom, not only from teams from GBH Education and StoryCorps, but also from very special guest Jason Reynolds. The Civics Collection, StoryCorps resources, and this webinar were all made possible with a generous funding support from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Before we get started, I wanted to share that this webinar is in collaboration with NCSS, the National Council for the Social Studies, and Keely from there would like to welcome you tonight. So please, Keely, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nikki, and welcome to everyone. Thank you to GBH and StoryCorps for being a part of this session tonight. I apologize if my bandwidth is low and if my audio is coming through choppy, but just a quick plug for our annual conference that is coming up. The National Council for the Social Studies will be meeting in Boston November 22nd through the 24th. We look forward to hosting 4,500 plus social studies educators and people interested in social studies from all over the world will be coming to Boston in just a few weeks. And we are thrilled to have a few keynote and featured speakers that include Ken Burns, Doris Kearns Goodwin, Eric Liu, Ned Black, and Ta-Nehisi Coates. We're thrilled to have that lineup, and we're going to have an amazing agenda ready for everyone joining us in Boston this year. And GBH will also be having a public open house at the Boston Public Library. So please come join us. We hope to see you there in Boston. Thank you, Nikki.
Thanks so much, Keely. Yes, we will definitely be there. We're so excited. It's in our hometown this year, and we can't wait. Can't wait this November. Great. Just a little bit about who we are at GBH before we dig in deeper. GBH is Boston's local PBS station, and we produce about a fourth of the content that you see on PBS and PBS Kids. Here are just a few of our programs that we create. Some you might recognize, like Arthur, or Molly of Denali, or maybe Nova or Masterpiece. So really exciting that we get to produce these wonderful programs right here in Boston. We also co-created and co-manage PBS LearningMedia with PBS. This is a website that offers free resources for pre-K through 12 teachers and students. You can find resources on all different subject matters, media-rich, really high-quality, trustworthy resources. We encourage you to check out that site and sign up for a free account if you do not have one already. And a lot of the resources that you are going to be seeing here tonight live on this website. So please, I encourage you to check it out if you have not checked it out yet. Great. So for tonight's webinar, after I'm done my welcome remarks, I'm going to turn it over to one of our team members to talk about the Civics Collection on PBS LearningMedia. After that brief overview, we're going to hear from Jason Reynolds, and he's going to talk a little bit more about storytelling and the power of storytelling and why it's so important for youth and how it can be used in civic education. And then we're going to hear from the StoryCorps team, who's going to talk about their resources and ways to use their stuff in the classroom. And then we'll be closing out the webinar with some final remarks. So our speakers today from GBH, we have Lindsay Alveo, who is our social studies and curriculum specialist. And from StoryCorps, we are joined by Emily, who is their director of learning and engagement. Two wonderful speakers, and I'm so excited that we get to share their wealth of knowledge with you all here tonight. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay, who's going to dig into the Civics Collection.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I'm really excited and overjoyed to provide this preview and overview of our Civics Collection, and especially the fact that we get to do this with our friends at StoryCorps tonight. So the Civics Collection. This was conceptualized and designed in response to a need for a more engaging and effective classroom civics education approach. And really what the Civics Collection aims to do is to create a civically informed citizenry and basically help and make sure that teachers can ensure that students turn into a thriving democracy. So today, we know that classroom teachers are absolutely facing a rise in misinformation, in disinformation, and a widening toxic polarization. We've also seen lower scores on civics tests, and we've seen overall, in general, decreased proficiency of civic knowledge among Americans. And we've noticed and talked about that a traditional approach to civics really asks students to work through a bunch of worksheets, kind of name the branches of government or the steps for how a bill becomes a law, and that really just simply isn't working. So we wanted to create a new approach to civics education. And in our new approach to civics education, we wanted one that taught foundational civic knowledge through applied historical and modern day stories and examples. We wanted to highlight youth voices, and we wanted to help students see themselves as civic participants through media. And we all know that media is such a powerful classroom tool for storytelling and engaging learners. So this curriculum is based on both content and skills, and also really importantly, it's supplemental. So this way teachers can incorporate the parts of it that they want to use in their classroom without having to rewrite their curriculum or start over from scratch, and essentially use it in a way that's authentic to them. Also, all of our resources from our civics collection are grounded in our founding documents, which we've defined as the Declaration of Independence, the US Constitution, with the Bill of Rights and the subsequent amendments that followed. And most importantly, all of our resources are free for teachers. In fact, everything that we do at GBH Education through PBS LearningMedia is centered around the power of media to tell compelling stories from multiple perspectives. So I wanted to return to my question that I opened with this evening. In what ways do stories and human connection really spark our passion for civics? So what I want to think about is I asked you what kind of generated your first spark in civics. And a lot of you told stories of going to vote with a parent or a family member for the first time, something that you learned from a teacher in school. And it's all of those stories that we have. I remember my first real civic spark being in high school because I had such an engaging teacher who really wanted to impress upon us the importance of being a member of a thriving democracy and the importance of our voice to go out and vote. And so already we've seen the power of stories and how that can spark an interest of civics in the classroom. And so I want to use this as a really quick segue to give a little bit of an overview of our civics collection from a brief video we have.
Consider this. Young people care about current events. They avidly consume news on social media and want to change the world around them. Yet half of 18 to 24-year-olds didn't vote in 2020, and less than 1 in 4 8th graders demonstrate proficiency in civics. Yesterday's civics isn't working for today's students. They don't see themselves and their lives reflected in the curriculum, and they don't feel prepared to participate in civic affairs. Democracy doesn't work without participation, and we need informed citizens more than ever. So how do we get kids civically engaged? Start in the classroom, with resources for educators to help equip and inspire their students to become thoughtful and active citizens. Developed by a team of veteran educators with input from teachers and youth, the Civics Collection on PBS LearningMedia is designed to give students the essential civics knowledge and key skills they need to participate in our democracy. Free, media-based materials, including interactive timelines, youth-facing video series, and student activities help students engage actively and develop deep civic understanding through historic and modern-day examples. And with multiple perspectives and diverse stories, they can connect and experience our country's rich tapestry. A new generation needs a new media-rich approach to teaching civics in the classroom. The Civics Collection on PBS LearningMedia.
Oh, I just get
Consider
chills every time I see it. So the Civics Collection, as again, you saw, uses events, individuals, groups, relationships, and stories as ways to deepen civic knowledge through these multiple perspectives. And while our resources do cover basic civic knowledge that students need, they do so in a way that provides context, nuance, and background stories so students understand not just the mechanics of government, but the complexities of our government. So, for example, in one of our new interactive resources called The Influences on the US Constitution, students learn about different thinkers and writings that influenced the framers as they constructed the US Constitution. So from ancient Greece and Rome to Enlightenment philosophy, to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and to state constitutions, and then draws connections between the ways in which centuries of political thought, the rise of new political and philosophical ideologies, the observations and relationships with Indigenous governments, and the lived experiences of the revolution would permeate the framers' ideals and debates for a new form of government. For those of you who are new to the Civics Collection on PBS LearningMedia, I just wanted to highlight a few of our features that we provide for teachers in our resources. So Teaching Tips is our go-to for strategies to implement the media into your classroom. Teaching Tips provides a civic skill that students will be focusing on by using that media. All of our teaching tips, again, specifically connect each resource to our founding documents and draw the clear rationale or parallels or article of the Constitution that aligns with the resource, so you can share that with your students. It also provides recommendations for prerequisite knowledge that your students should have before interacting with or engaging with the media. And it also provides ideas or strategies for ways that teachers can extend the lesson further. Our interactive lessons, which are our self-contained lessons, where students can watch media, they can read texts, they can analyze primary sources, they can write notes, they can write short answer responses, or even essays, are one of our most popular resources on PBS LearningMedia. They allow students to work at their own pace, and they provide appropriate scaffolding, directions, and support. For example, they contain a glossary, so the vocabulary terms can be highlighted both within the text, so students can get the definition of a word as they're reading a paragraph, or again, they could go at the top to the glossary to get the definitions of those terms. The drop-down menu really makes it easy for students to navigate through the interactive lesson, and students can write their work straight into the lesson. And then these pair easily with your school's learning management system, so you can grade straight from our interactive platform. But what I love most of all about our interactive lessons is, again, how well they can tell a story. So for example, in this interactive lesson, Searching for Equality, Debating the Founding Principles, students will learn about the different people and groups, such as women, enslaved people, men who didn't own property, Jews, Muslims, and Indigenous people who sought to be represented in the values of the American Revolution that were embodied in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution during the early Republic. One such woman was Judith Sargent Murray. She was an Enlightenment thinker. She was from Massachusetts, and she was a huge early advocate of women's equality. And she really wanted to make sure that women had access to education and the right to control their own earnings. And she really argued that for the new nation to flourish, women needed to be educated so they in turn could educate their children, at the time their sons, who were going to be the citizens who were voting. And she, in one of her essays on the equality of sexes, wrote about how women needed to have the same opportunities as men in order to be educated. And it wasn't their fault if they were seen as inferior because they didn't have those same opportunities. So I highlight her as an example of her story, and the stories of so many others from the period really demonstrate the different ways in which people use their own writing, the ability to petition, the ability to write their own state constitutions, and their ability to negotiate and navigate terms with others to imagine a society based on the principles of liberty and equality where everyone could really have a voice. We all know that students, and actually quite frankly adults, we really learn through stories, and in particular from hearing about each other's stories and backgrounds. So I just wanted to highlight a couple other resources in the collection and talk a way about how they can really model how we have conversations and stories and how we can practice the skill of civil discourse through our civics collection. So civil discourse is a way to gain understanding, to generate knowledge and vibrant discussion, and use this as a way to improve public life. And so in the civics collection, we have several videos that are between legislators, always a Democrat and a Republican, and they really model how to have civil discourse on a difficult topic. So these conversations do a great job in showing how elected officials can navigate and engage in a really thoughtful policy discussion, but they do so in a way that's really respectful. They listen to each other, they model how to respectfully disagree, they talk about their positions, potential areas for compromise, and oftentimes they share their own stories, their own backgrounds, their own knowledge and perspectives, and even their childhoods to explain why they've taken a certain position, but also listen to their colleagues. After students have engaged with media and videos like the one I just mentioned, we've provided student-facing resources, which we call independent student activities, that scaffold ways for students to practice a skill, again, in this case, civil discourse, and develop that skill in your classroom. So through this independent student activity, students take turns learning to listen, sharing their perspective, and asking questions. And it's done so in a way that students can work in pairs or in small groups, all clearly labeled, scaffolded, with very little to no teacher interaction or direct support. And they learn really how to have hard and difficult conversations and to share their experiences with others and really see how that their own stories can build civic bridges in society. And finally, our civics collection really seeks to center youth voices. So one example of this is through our new series called Game Changers, which seeks to actively engage students in the process of understanding their civic rights by asking them to analyze personal stories of civic engagement and identify the constitutional rights that are reflected within these stories. So Game Changers makes the case that exercising one's rights is as vital today as it was when it was enshrined in the Constitution. And it's crucial to exercise our rights to ensure our democracy lives on. Composed of 7 short youth-facing videos, each mini documentary episode focuses on the story of an everyday citizen or everyday citizens who have chosen to exercise their constitutional rights in order to make changes within their communities, their own lives, or the lives of those around them. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about one of our game changers, Samantha Bevins. As a high school student, I believe when she was a sophomore or junior, Samantha realized that while she would be 18 years old for the general election, she'd still be 17 years old when the primary came around, and realized that she really wouldn't have a choice as to which candidate she could vote for in the general election because she couldn't vote in the primary. So she did some research. And she decided, oh, I want to change the law so that way if a person is going to be 18 for the general election, but not the primary, they'd still be able to vote in that primary. And she spent over 5 years trying to get this legislation passed. But what's really great is that Samantha's story has been inspirational for students already. They were absolutely amazed that Samantha called her state representative. Her state representative picked up the phone and worked with her to sponsor the legislation and to get bipartisan support in this measure. So as you can see from their quotes we have from students, her story has been empowering and has piqued student interest in the legislative process and helped students find their own ways to create change. And now I'm really thrilled to turn it over to Emily, our incredible partner at StoryCorps, where several of their human interest stories can be found in our civics collection. And Emily, thank you so much for the way that you use storytelling to center our humanity.
Lindsay, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And StoryCorps has been so honored to collaborate with you all at GBH to contribute a selection of StoryCorps animations and develop story-forward resources for the Civics Collection this year. With the expertise of teachers, feedback from students, and collaboration with seasoned curriculum writers, we have selected 17 animations from StoryCorps' Library of Stories that are part of 9 new PBS LearningMedia resources, along with those tips for bringing them into your civics classroom, aligned in the way that Lindsay was just sharing with us. But this webinar is about story. So let's take some time to listen to one of those StoryCorps stories that you'll find in the collection. This short piece that we'll listen to comes from a longer unscripted conversation that was recorded at StoryCorps in 2018 and is preserved in StoryCorps' archive and at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress.
What's up, y'all? This is Jason Reynolds, and I'm excited to share a story with you. In 2016, Amina Amdeen, a Muslim student at the University of Texas, went to a rally in Austin to protest the presidential election of Donald Trump. Joseph Weidnick went to the same rally to show his support for Trump. While Amina wore her hijab, Joseph wore a Make America Great Again hat. At first glance, Amina and Joseph appear to have little in common, but something happened at the rally that brought them together, and they recorded this conversation to look back at what happened. What does it take to connect with people we disagree with rather than keep our distance? If we all got in the habit of seeking connections with those different from us, what effect could that have on our democracy?
I noticed you with the hat, and I noticed that you were surrounded by some people, and I noticed that they were being kind of threatening, and then somebody snatched your hat off your head. And that's the point where something kind of snapped inside me because I wear a Muslim hijab, and I've been in situations where people have tried to snatch it off my head.
Wow.
And I rushed towards you, and I just started screaming, "Leave him alone, give me that back."
I don't think we could be any further apart as people, and yet it was just kind of like this common, that's not okay moment. You are genuinely the only Muslim person I know. It's not that I've actively avoided, it's just,
Yeah.
I've just never been in the position where I can interact for an extended period of time. So I guess my views on the Muslim community have been influenced by a lot of the news articles and things of that nature.
I feel like a lot of times in the media, you don't see the normal Muslim, the one that listens to classic rock like I do. You don't meet that Muslim.
Can you tell me about where you grew up? What was that part of your life like?
So I was born in Baghdad, in Iraq. I moved to the US when I was 10 years old.
Okay.
Being a Muslim girl, I stood out in almost every single way that you can in middle school, the worst time to stand out. What about you? How was it like when you grew up?
I was homeschooled,
Mm-hmm.
so it was a vastly different experience. Socially, I didn't have, I guess, as many friends as most people would. I only went to public school 1 year of my life, and I got in 3 fights, and I lost all of them. I actually lost a lot of friends because of this election, because of my political stance. So I hope that I can be the reason that someone decides to talk to someone as opposed to just cutting them out of their life or blocking them on Twitter,
Yeah. I'd like for this to encourage other people to engage in more conversations with people that you don't agree with.
That's what it's all about. I'm so glad I wasn't the only one who felt like that.
So that's one of the stories from our collection. And I'm
What's
curious.
up, y'all? This is
We're going to get to Jason in 1 second, but I'm curious how you think you might use that video in the classroom. There are teaching tips in the civics collection and the resources, but what is sparking for you about how you might bring that into your curriculum or bring that into your class? So share that with each other in the chat. We hope you engage. And I am excited to welcome our guest of honor, as I know all of you are. You just heard him introducing that last animation. Most of you know him as a best-selling author and poet with numerous accolades that you can read about online in his biography. So I won't embarrass him with all of those accolades that you can read there. But those include that he was the 2020 to 2022 National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, and most recently was awarded a 2024 MacArthur Fellowship in recognition of the scope of his ongoing work to ensure that young people see themselves in literature and feel empowered to tell them their own stories. More close to home for us at StoryCorps, Jason, as a young lad, was a StoryCorps facilitator more than a decade ago and is now a member of our board. Throughout the Civics Collection, you'll hear Jason introducing individual stories and themed collections in each StoryCorps resource. So it's been an honor to collaborate with him on this project. Welcome, Jason. I'll turn it over to you now as we continue our exploration of why stories matter and why they matter for young people.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Emily. Hey, good evening, everybody. I have no idea what I'm doing here. You know what I mean? And I don't mean that really, but I'm also sort of like, well, I mean, you've seen all the resources, and you heard such intelligent and brilliant and spot on. You've given such a platform to sort of help with what we're working on through this moment. So because I don't really have any of that to offer you, I do have the thing that I know how to do, which is to tell you a story. This particular story will span over the course of 20 years. Um, Begins with me as a 10-year-old. You know, anyone who knows my story, by the way, most people talk about how I didn't read a book until I was 17 and I found rap music, and rap music sort of introduced me to writing and language. But that doesn't mean that it introduced me to story. And I never really talk about the sort of turning point in my life where I was introduced to story. Books came later, but story. And it happened the same year that I started writing. I was a 10-year-old child. I'm sitting at the table, the kitchen table at my mother's house. And, I'm eating turkey wings and Brussels sprouts. My mom had to think about Brussels sprouts, in the 90s. It's 1993, by the way. So Brussels sprouts was America's worst vegetable, and yet America's most popular vegetable within the household. And so my mom is making Brussels sprouts, and I'm forced to eat them, me and my older brother. And I think we were watching something on television that she didn't want us to see or that she didn't approve of. She turned the TV off and she turned on talk radio, which for any child is like kryptonite, right? Like it's like talk radio is the worst thing in the world when you're 10 years old. But my mom turns on talk radio. I'm trying to sort of force down my Brussels sprouts. I'm swallowing it down with chocolate milk, right? Real chocolate milk. You remember what I'm talking about for those of us of a certain age. And the radio comes on and there's a special presentation. And it's an audio documentary, 30 minutes. It's a story called Ghetto Life 101. Now, immediately my ears perk up as these two kids begin to speak. And I learned shortly after that these two young men in Chicago, they lived in the Ida B. Wells projects, were given tape recorders and told to tape their lives for a week. And so they bopped around the neighborhood. They taped their grandmother in the house, what it's like to hear the sound of an extended family, to hear the sound of a project building, to hear the sound of a city, what it's like to hear two kids, two pre-teenagers talk trash to one another, be friends, comrades, navigate this environment by themselves, to see them hop on the bus, or to hear them rather, to see them in my mind, but to hear them hop on the bus and move around the city, go on an adventure, just by staying on town, by not getting off, and hearing the people get on and the people get off, and the sound of the change machine, the sound of the doors opening. And I'm sitting there listening, and my mind is blown. And the reason why my mind is blown is because they sounded like me, because their neighborhood sound like my neighborhood, because their grandmother sounded exactly like my grandmother, who I just lost, my first death, right? Still in grief, still in mourning, but hearing their grandmother made me think of my own. Hearing their struggles made me think of my own. Hearing their humor made me think of my own. And I realized in that moment that I had never heard something so directly connected to my experience. I had never heard something so real, so tangible, so palpable as it pertained to the realities of my life, the complex realities, not necessarily complicated, right? I think those two words are not the same, right? A complex reality. Complication connotes something is knotted, but complexity connotes that something is layered. And I lived a layered life, and these young men were living a layered life, not one in search of salvation, right? Not one in need of salvation, but one that had the right to be seen. And I had an opportunity to see it, at least in my imagination, by hearing their stories. Now, 10 years later, fate would have it, as fate often does. I moved to New York City. I'm now obsessed with story. I don't know if I thought about it at the time, but Ghetto Life 101 had changed my life, had me thinking about the ways one might communicate their realities. One might imagine a new reality. And so because of that imagination and because of my desire to find a new life for myself, to build a castle with no diagram of how to do so, I end up in New York City. I'm 20 years old, just about to be 21. I walk down the street to the local coffee shop in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, in search of a job. I'm talking to the guy who owns the coffee shop. His name is Lloyd Porter, and his brother, Gregory Porter. who some of you may know as a famous jazz singer, funny enough. We're sitting in the coffee shop talking as I'm begging for a gig. And I say, look, man, I come in here every day. I spend $1.25 just to sit here for 6, 7, 8 hours to use your Wi-Fi. It would be more beneficial to you if you could just give me a job. And Lloyd says, man, I'm not giving you no job because I already know who you want to be. I say, well, who do you think I want to be? He said, I know who you want to be. You want to be a writer. You want to be a storyteller. I know you want to be a storyteller. We've talked about it. Plus, I watch you tell stories to everybody who comes in this coffee shop and decides to strike up a conversation with you, my cheap and broke friend. He said, so I can't give you a job because the moment you get a better opportunity, you're going to leave because you're going to make it. Now, I respected what he said, but I also was upset because I needed to figure out a way to pay my rent. But because he was my friend and he saw me as a young man who potentially had a future, he said, look, but what I will do is I will introduce you to an organization that I think you'd be perfect for. They're new, just getting started. My brother and I have participated in it. I said, well, what's it called? He said, it's called StoryCorps. It's right down the street. I said, well, can you put me on? Can you give me a referral? Can you help me apply? Said, of course, I got you. I fill out the application, go through the process, and I get my interview and I land this job. Now, what I did not know, but learned shortly after getting the job, is that the man who made Ghetto Life 101 is the man who started StoryCorps, Dave Isay, a man who intrinsically yet implicitly had been a part of my life since I was a child, a 10-year-old boy, had chemically changed me simply by putting the microphones in the hands of kids just like me, putting the power in our palms. And now I'm working for his organization, brand new organization. I'm the second class of StoryCorps, and our jobs are to sit every single day and listen to the stories of everyday Americans. Couldn't be a better job for a kid who wanted to tell stories for a living. I'm 21, about to be 22 years old. Dream come true. This is like the sweetest gig you could get in New York City, as far as I was concerned. There was enough money to pay my bills, enough money to do my work. And when I had to work, I'm working in a space where I get to be encouraged and inspired, and my imagination is stoked and sparked. And more importantly, my humanity is strengthened because I get to sit and listen to all the people that perhaps I'd never know, and listen to the mundanity of their lives and the magic of those same lives. Now, I could tell you a million stories that I experienced over the course of 2.5 years. For me, 2 years. It's supposed to be a 1-year appointment. I did 1 3/4. But the one that I want to share with you all today is actually a very simple story. It ain't much to it. The organization started a new initiative called the Griot. And the Griot was meant to collect the stories specifically of Black Americans. And so they went to sort of Black American hotspots, chocolate cities, so to speak. And one of those chocolate cities that we visited was Atlanta, Georgia. And we set up shop right at the King Center, the Martin Luther King Center, right in the parking lot of it. It was an Airstream trailer, and I'm working every day. I'm living down there on assignment, which made me feel very important, by the way. And I'm going to work every single day in this trailer. And I'm listening to the stories of Atlanta today, and the stories of that day, rather, which is 2004, 5, and the stories of Atlanta in the 1980s, the story of Atlanta in the 1960s, right? And one of the stories that I love and I think about all the time is there was I guess they probably were about 60, 70, a brother and sister came into the booth to tell their story, to have a conversation, and we would record it. And I was the person working the technology, working the recording machine and taking notes and, doing my job as a facilitator. And I'm thinking, like, they tell me, like, we've come to talk about Dr. King. And I'm like, this is great, because this is really what I want to hear. I want to hear about the civil rights movement. I want to hear about the marches. I want to hear about the sit-ins. I want to hear about segregation, desegregation. I want to hear about Woolworth. I want to hear about Auburn Avenue, Ebenezer Baptist. I want to get into all of it, right? The stories that I heard my mother tell me every single year during Martin Luther King Day. I had to sit at the kitchen table, and she had to tell me the story over and over again about her time at the March on Washington as a 16-year-old girl, how she went when nobody else else wanted to go. She lived right down the street. We from DC, and how she goes down there, walks down to the National Mall, can't get close enough to see him, but could get close enough to hear his voice and could hear Dr. King say all the things that he said. And she knew in that moment that she had to go back to work in the mailroom, but knew because of hearing his voice that she would not stay in the mailroom of that job. Instead, she stayed for a little while and then moved her way on up the ladder and eventually sat in the corner office in the executive suite as the first Black person, the first Black woman to ever hold that position in the insurance company, right? But she started there at 16 in the mailroom, and the only thing that catalyzed her to do something different was the sound of Dr. King's voice. Now, I'd heard that story my entire life, and now I'm at ground zero as it pertains to the civil rights movement, and I'm there doing some work, and I'm talking to real Atlantans who were there. And this couple comes in and they say, man, we want to tell you a story about Dr. King. And I'm like, yes. And they say, when we were young, we lived next door to him. My eyes get this big. And they say, we saw him all the time, playing in the yard with his kids. We saw him all the time, helping with the groceries, helping his wife get the groceries out of the car. We saw him all the time, walking up and down the street to the church. But the best moment for them was when the brother was going to prom. He hadn't decided to go until the last minute, and he realized he didn't have a prom suit. So he goes next door to try to figure it out. And Mrs. Coretta Scott King says, oh, don't worry about it. We'll give you one of Martin's. And this boy, who was 17 years old at the time, gets to put on Martin Luther King Jr.'s suit, his pants, his shirt, his coat, and his tie, and got to go to prom wearing arguably the greatest American of all time's clothes. What an incredible story for me to hear. Now, fast forward 10 more years. 10 more years, I'm on tour, right? My career has panned out better than I ever imagined. And I'm traveling the country talking to kids all over the place. Some of you may have had me come to your schools. I hope so, right? I pop in and I developed my own style, right, by this point, in terms of my presentation and my storytelling abilities and the way that I connect with young people. And what that style is very simple. You never come into a classroom or a group of kids and you're the presenter from outside, you're the assembly for the day, and make it seem like school. We all have had assemblies when we were in school. The whole point of an assembly is for it to not feel like school, right? You're not in class. And so I knew going into these spaces, like, I'm not going to come in here and make it seem like school, because no kid wants me to come in and tell them to sort of read and write and do all those things, because they hear that every single day from their teachers and their parents. So I always say, I'll be the cool uncle. So I'll come in and I'll talk about my life. I'll tell you the story about what it was like growing up in DC. I'll tell you the story about what it felt like not reading until I found rap music. I tell you all kinds of silly stories about Kool-Aid and welfare peanut butter and ramen noodle meals. I'll tell you about what it was like when the crack epidemic hit and how our neighborhoods were torn apart. I'll tell you about what it was like to not have the internet, no cell phone, no YouTube, no social media, how in order to see what your favorite rapper was wearing, you had to go to the grocery store and open up the magazines and get the fold out and posters, right? And that's the way we knew what style was doing and what we were supposed to be wearing. I tell them about what rap music sounded like back then and how it made me feel like a giant, how it felt like those were the only people who understood that I existed, right? Because the music they were making felt like it belonged to me. I tell them stories about what I went through in high school, the ups and the downs, how when I got to college, I almost failed out because I could not pass English and I could not pass math because I wasn't that great of a student, mainly because I was always on my own thing, doing my own thing and not following directions. But that's a story for another time. I tell them about what it was like to graduate from college just barely, but to make it out and to land my big time publishing contract in New York at 21 years old, so forth and so on, all of this. And then I slide a little bit at the backside where I tell them that I want them to sort of like love themselves, right? And be themselves and let them know that their stories are the only stories that actually matter in the world, that everybody's story matters, but that their story matters just as much as anybody else. Now, I've done this at least a billion times, it feels like, right? But at this particular time, I was still getting my legs up under me and I was still getting my feet wet. And I show up at a school and there's a kid in the crowd who is heckling me. Now, I'm looking for the teacher. I'm looking all over the place like, is somebody going to come and, take care of this? But no one is coming. And this kid is acting silly and being funny and cracking jokes and yelling out, and he's disrupting my presentation. So my instincts kick in and I say, hey, do you think you can do this better than me? This is what I learned from the teachers when I was growing up, right? Every teacher on this call has probably said this. Do you think you could do my job better than me? Now, what he's supposed to say is no, but he's a kid with a strong will. And he calls my bluff. And he's like, yeah, I do. And so now we're playing chicken and I can't lose. So I'm trying to call his bluff. So I say, well, then come on up to the stage. Now, in this moment, I'm thinking, he ain't going to come. But he calls my bluff again. And he gets up out of his seat. And he walks to the side of the stage and is coming up. Now, at this point, I'm looking for the teachers. Teachers are looking like, oh, no, what's going to happen? But no one is getting up and saying anything. He comes up on stage. He comes over to me as I call him over. Now he's in the spotlight. And I said, you ready for this? Now, at this point, the teachers have stood up because now they realize, oh, no, this is going to go left. But now I'm sort of like, too late. You should have done your jobs. Now it's on me. I said, you ready for this? He said, yeah. I said, you want the microphone? He said, yeah. So I give him the microphone. And then I nudge him forward so he can get to the front of the stage in front of 3,000 students, his classmates. And I said, go ahead, say something. And he holds the microphone in his hand and he holds it up to his mouth and he says, yo. And that's it. And the sound of his voice reverberated all over the room. Yo, 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 bouncing off the walls, hits the back of the room, bouncing off the ceiling. The acoustics are wild and it's all just echoing. And he starts to smile. And then he says it again, yo. And all the kids are giggling, but it starts to quiet down as the yo sort of moves around the room. And then he turns to look at me, and his eyes are just as wide as mine were some years back when I learned about Dr. King. And I said, you good? And he said, yeah, I'm good. And I told him to sit on the side of the stage and stay up close to me. And I went on about my presentation. Now, what is the point of all of this? And how does it pertain to what you got going on? When I think about civics, I think about it a little differently. Think about the nuts and bolts, which is what we need to know. Young people need to know. But when I look back to Ghetto Life 101, there's so much to learn about that. If my mother would have had a moment to have a conversation with me, ask me some questions about what it is that I thought I was hearing, right? What it is to live on the bus, to ride the bus every day, which I was doing. Do you think everybody has to ride the bus? Do you think everybody can? Does public transportation even exist in all of our communities? And if it does not, how do we make that happen? Is there a way to make that happen? How do we have more access when it comes to transportation? How do we have more access when it comes to a balanced meal, right? To food, to housing? Why are so many people living in these young men's project apartments? Is this the way it is for everybody? And if you are a person who lives in this community and lives like this, you can listen to this and feel less ashamed because these are beautiful children telling a beautiful story. But if you are a person living on the other side of town, a person living on the north side of Chicago, perhaps, or a person living outside of the city, perhaps you listen to this and feel a little less afraid. And in that story, we form connection. The same goes for the story about Dr. King. I know it seems so strange and so small, so simple, but the truth of the matter is the reason why so many of us don't engage in civics is because so many of us believe that you have to be special to do so. And to hear a story like that, to hear a story that Dr. King was just a regular guy. He was just a person who understood his civic responsibility differently. But at the end of the day, was still just a regular guy with kids and a wife and a suit to spare to the teenage boy who lived next door who wanted to be decent for his prom. There's more civics in that interaction than in most of the things we do every day. And to know that, to be a young person and to know that, to hear that story means that we have civic power now, that we have civic responsibility too, because I'm just a normal guy too. I'm just a normal kid as well. That was the way it was for story for me, right? When it came to story, the reason I engaged with it is because I realized at some point in my 20s that I actually have a place in the spectrum and lineage of storytelling, not because I'm a storyteller, but because I am a person. Imagine that. And every person has a story. It was emboldening for me in the same way that the story about Dr. King was. And lastly, when I think about that little kid who got the microphone and said, yo, I think we underestimate how so many young people have no idea what it feels like to hear their voices loudly. what it feels like to hear the sound of themselves bounce to the back of a room, hit the walls, hit the ceiling, spread and blanket over a crowd. So many young people don't feel like they have the power to do so, that their voices are not amplified, megaphoned or microphoned, right? They want it to be trumpeted, but so many of them feel like they've been muzzled. But so much of civic responsibility has to do with you believing that your voice can be amplified, that your voice can resonate. And so I think the work that everyone is doing in this particular case, and the power of story, as I bring Emily back on, the power of story, I think this is sort of what we can, how we can use it in the classroom. There is a different kind of literacy that can be gained, right? There is a different kind of literacy, and this literacy is just as life-saving as the reading and the writing, let alone when we start thinking about how we learn to critically think. Civics isn't just about sort of voting or even just civil discourse. It's also about critical thought. Do we have the ability to think critically, right? To really suss it out with ourselves. And in doing so, we realize that it's not about compare and contrast. It's simply about connecting. And there is a way for us all to connect with each other. I want to end here. I listened to that clip that we played. I love that clip, and I've been fortunate to hear it many, many times as a board member for StoryCorps. The funniest part for me is when the young man says, "You and me couldn't be more different as people." And the irony in that is people aren't that different. Inherently, as a person, you and I are so close together, right? So it's an interesting thing that he said, right? Because the irony is that it's not the case. It's actually the complete opposite of that. Complete opposite. It doesn't matter who you pick. You and me couldn't be more alike. That's the truth. No matter who it is, you and me couldn't be more alike. And so for that, I want to leave you with that, and I want to say thank you all for having me. And I'm grateful for your work. You've inspired me, and I hope you inspire many, many young people so that we can pave the way for a more free and civically astute country.
Jason, thank you so much. Everyone's really appreciating everything that you're sharing, and you've just told the story, your story, the story of StoryCorps, the story of the power that everyone here watching actually has. So curious for you all. I'm sure you're feeling inspired. This is what you do in your classrooms every day, igniting curiosity, sparking imagination, finding ways to tell and share the stories of our past, our present, and our future, and helping students be able to tell their story as a part of that larger narrative. So how do you use stories in your classroom? Or if this is sparking some new ideas, what are those ideas? Share them with one another, particularly as you're thinking about civics. Tell us that too, tell one another, be inspired by that. And while you do that, I'll share just a little bit more about where these stories come from. So for 21 years, StoryCorps has been bringing regular people like you and me together to talk about our lives in our own words, to have conversations about what matter most to us, and to ask those questions that we don't take the time to do every day. Those stories are archived at the Library of Congress to be part of history. What we heard from earlier came from one of those unedited conversations in the archive. I feel inspired to go into our archive and search for some of those stories that Jason was sharing, that he was able to witness and help archive with us. That archive now contains over 700,000 voices. It is the largest single collection of voices gathered in one place, and it is growing every day, in part because people like you and students are contributing to that archive to help it grow. You can access and search that archive, as I'm feeling inspired to do, to discover those stories at archive.storycorps.org. They're there for you to find. But a big part of what we do at StoryCorps is finding ways to bring those stories to you so that we can listen to them and learn from one another, and they're not just sitting on a dusty digital shelf. So we share those every Friday on National Public Radio. We have bring them together in themed podcast seasons. We share even more every day on social media and find ways to bring them more easily into the classroom for you. StoryCorps stories, as we heard in that example, they're short. They're usually around 3 minutes. They're these up close, zoomed in personal experiences. So these are not the stories that give you the big picture, the context, the encyclopedic details. They are stories that you can bring in that will add 1 or 2 intimate voices, personal memories, identities, and perspectives. So what we've done, I think Jason set us up really well to talk about what is it that we've seen the power of these stories. How have teachers been using StoryCorps stories, the style of bringing people together and having those conversations in the classroom? Really, this is about incorporating diverse first-person narratives into your work. And we've heard actually from some teachers and others that sometimes when they bring these stories into the classroom, it is the first opportunity that their students see diverse voices represented as primary sources in their class. The first time they're seeing themselves maybe or their families reflected as resources in their class, but also gives other students the opportunity to engage and listen to and build perspective with people who are different from them and find that connection, find that empathy, find where they connect as human beings. And as we move through that, this is all also at the heart of StoryCorps about cultivating those skills in civic discourse, in listening, in curiosity, in asking thoughtful questions with the goal of understanding. So really through the process of listening to these stories that we're bringing to you in the Civics Collection from StoryCorps, but also practicing having conversations in the same way, the way that we've created those StoryCorps stories for you. And that leads to the third is student-led media creation, really using the style of a StoryCorps conversation for students to practice doing that work, practice those skills in interviewing, in listening, and creating new media that they can contribute as part of the historical record. And we can just see, I'll bring this out just to bring home something that Jason said. So this is from a student whose teacher really incorporated StoryCorps stories and practices in their classroom. And they said, at first, when we were introduced to StoryCorps, I thought, I don't have a story interesting enough to tell. I'm sure I wasn't the only one who was thinking that. I was wrong. Everyone has a story to tell. Whether you think it's interesting or not, that's what defines you. That's what makes you you. And that's really what it's about for us. So we are incredibly excited we have this collection of, again, 2 decades of these stories that we're pulling from our archive and sharing with you. And the Civics Collection gave us this opportunity to help bridge that for you so that you can bridge those more easily into your civics classroom. And we are so grateful that we worked with a wonderful set of collaborators to make that happen, including our teacher advisors, seasoned curriculum writers, the GBH Education team and content team, and GBH's education and student advisors really sort of helped us understand how do StoryCorps stories fit into your work in the civics classroom so that you can take these resources and pick them up and bring these first-person stories and bridge them into those larger conversations about our democracy, about civics, and engage in those skills. So you can see here just a few of these examples. We have 9 of them. Some of them are single videos. Some of them you'll hear a collection of voices that you can that you can pull up here. So you'll hear, for example, in the value of a vote, we'll ask questions about why is the right to vote essential in democracy, and hear that first person story about engaging in the right to vote. We just watched the video from Finding Common Ground through Civil Discourse. In the challenges of integration after Brown v. Board of Education, we're seeing two first-person accounts of people talking about what happens in their community and asking that question in the resource, are laws enough to create a just and equal society? And we have even more. We can move through these just to give you a little glimpse of the voices and the stories that we're bringing here, where you can see these questions that we're asking in them, to really help students think about their civic impact, to watch people take action in their community, to hear their perspective, and then identify their own and take action. So for every one of these resources, Lindsay talked about this a little bit before. Here's an example of a resource where we have a collection of stories, acting locally for civic impact, where we hear and see some examples of of people in their communities doing small things to make change and affect them. And so for each, we'll use this as an example. For each of those resources, there are prompts that ask before viewing that give some context, and help students think about what they prime themselves for the topics at hand. While viewing, gives some prompts to guide students through the listening process, to engage with the media and understand it. And then after viewing, where really you get into drawing those connections to your civics topics, and practice those skills together. And then finally, there are opportunities to take it further. So where you might want to assign something for homework, might want to take this into another class in the future. All of these, they're here, they're designed so that you could pick it up and go, but really you could also find an exercise or a reflection that will work for you and go with it. So we're excited to imagine all of the ways that you might do that using the resources, or beyond. I'm just going to link really quickly for you all the link to that resource right there. So one of the exercises, the taking it further exercises that is a part of many of these resources with StoryCorps, is a StoryCorps interview guide, is a suggestion, is a prompt to invite your students to take action and actually start to tell their story, or ask someone in their community, someone in the classroom, someone in their family to tell their story, to bring this into their own life and to be a part of that narrative. So in those resources, there's a StoryCorps interview guide that is a chart that you can just use over and over again. You can edit it and adapt it, but it walks students through a process of preparing their interview questions, inviting a conversation partner, conducting that interview, and perhaps even recording it with StoryCorps' free digital tools and contributing it to our archive, and then summarizing and reflecting on that. So speaking of picking up StoryCorps' digital tools, this is something that we have been inviting teachers and students and anyone and everyone every year to do as sort of an assignment for all of us across the country. This time of year, during the holiday season, we invite everyone to participate in documenting our collective history by recording intergenerational conversations, adding them to our archive using our free recording tools. You can search for the StoryCorps app wherever you get your apps. And student contributions every year are what has actually helped our archive grow in both numbers and diversity. It has really made the archive a more accurate representation of who we are at this moment in time. So encourage you to do this. Visit thegreatlisten.org to find out more there. At the QR code, you can go straight to our educator toolkit to find ideas, lessons, stories to bring that into your classroom, exercises to practice active listening. But whether or not you'll do that, I just want to make this personal invitation to you this time of year. If you're thinking about using StoryCorps in your classroom, or even if you're not, I invite you to just take some time over the coming month to sit down with someone who matters to you, and record that conversation, and really take the time. That is the heart of what StoryCorps is. That's the heart of what has built all of the stories that you'll find from StoryCorps in the collection. And so I really invite you, we were going to share more stories, but we'll skip this. And I just want to encourage you. I saw a question to find StoryCorps stories. We have 9 resources in the Civics Collection. Go to the Civics Collection, search StoryCorps. You'll find all of those. Bubble up. And really encourage you to find those. We'll add some more resources in the chat and in the resources that will follow today's session, with really an invitation for you to explore even more stories from StoryCorps' 21 years of bringing these to you, how to explore our archive, and then hope that you'll contribute along with the rest of us this holiday season, to allow our voices to be a part of history. Thank you so much. I'll pass it back to Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Nikki, back actually just with some quick final remarks from me, and then I'd love to turn it over to Jason, if he's still with us, to just say a couple final few things before we close out for the night. Here are just some other collections that might be of interest to you. Our U.S. History Collection, American Experience, and Frontline. Just a reminder, you're going to get a resource document tomorrow with links to everything you saw here tonight, and even some stuff you didn't see that we had to skip for sake of time. So that will be hitting your inboxes tomorrow. We also wanted to share that we have a lot of other webinars available for you to watch on demand on our YouTube channel, including some webinars with other authors as well, if you're interested in that. So please take the time to go check those out. Yay, we will be at NCSS in Boston this November. We have tons of presentations. We'll be exhibiting, StoryCorps will be exhibiting. We love for you to come and say hi to us if you will also be there. We are hosting an open house at our Boston Public Library with panels and giveaways. You can grab a ticket. It's free to come and join us. That link will also be going out in the follow-up email and the resource document, so don't worry about grabbing it here. Lindsay also will be dropping it in the chat, though. And then lastly, we'd love feedback. Please tell us how we did. Here is our survey. It closes in about 2 weeks. Once you complete the survey, you will get a certificate of attendance if that is of interest to you. And again, these links will be coming at you in the chat and in a follow-up email tomorrow. And now I'd love to just invite Jason back if he has any final words to share with you all before we close out.
We're past time and I have no other words other than, please, everybody, just remember that stories are human glue. Stories are human glue, and use them as such. Thank you.